The city streets were loud, filled with the sounds of cars honking and people rushing to places they probably didn't want to be. But amidst all that noise, there was a girl who walked quietly. She was 14 years old, though she looked smaller because she didn't eat enough. Her clothes were clean, but they were old and faded, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and the hems. She had learned to sew up the tears herself, using a needle and some thread she had found, making the patches look almost invisible. She took pride in her appearance, not because she wanted to show off, but because she believed that even if you had nothing, you still had your dignity. Her name was not important to the people she passed. To them, she was just part of the scenery, like a lamppost or a mailbox. She didn't mind. Being invisible meant she was safe. She wasn't looking for a handout, and she wasn't looking for trouble. She was just walking. Every day, after the school bell rang and the other kids ran to the buses or to their parents waiting in shiny cars, this girl would take a different path. She would walk past the crowded corner stores and the parks that were too full of people shouting. She would walk until the pavement changed from cracked gray concrete to smooth, black stones that lined the driveways of the rich part of town. She wasn't there to steal. She had never stolen a thing in her life. She wasn't there to beg. She had too much pride for that. She was drawn there by something else entirely, something she couldn't explain to anyone else, even if she had someone to talk to. Her destination was a large house that sat at the end of a quiet lane. It wasn't the biggest house on the street, but to the girl, it was the most beautiful. It didn't have scary fences or sharp spikes. Instead, it had a low stone wall and a front garden that was always full of bright, neatly trimmed flowers. But the girl never looked at the flowers. She never looked at the expensive windows or the fancy cars that sometimes sat in the driveway. Her eyes were always fixed on one specific spot. At the front of the house, there was a large, clear glass pane that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. Through this glass, you could see right into the front parlor. And sitting in the middle of that room, bathed in the afternoon light, was a piano. It was a grand piano, black and glossy. It looked like a giant creature made of black glass and gold. It was the most beautiful thing the girl had ever seen. The girl knew about music. Before her life had become so hard, before the bills piled up and the sickness took her parents away, there had been music. She remembered a time when she was very little, sitting on a bench next to a woman who smelled like lavender. She remembered the feel of keys under her small fingers. She remembered that pressing a key made a sound, and that making a sound could change how you felt inside. She didn't have a piano anymore, she didn't even have a radio most of the time. But she had her memory. And she had this house. Every afternoon, she would stop at the edge of the property. She would step carefully onto the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the stone wall. She would make sure her shoes, which were old and scuffed, were clean enough. Then, she would stand there, very still. She would look through the glass. She would stare at the piano and imagine what it would sound like. In her head, she would play songs. She would press her fingers against her own palm, pretending it was the ivory keys. She could almost hear the deep, low notes of the left hand and the light, twinkling notes of the right hand. She would close her eyes for a moment and let the music play inside her mind. It was a quiet song, sad but lovely. It was a song that made her feel like she wasn't alone in the world. People walking by might have thought she was crazy. A poor girl, staring into a rich man's house. But she wasn't crazy. She was just a musician without an instrument. On this particular day, the air was crisp. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. The street was very quiet. The girl adjusted the strap of her backpack, which held all her worldly possessions, a few school books, a sweater, and a sandwich she had saved from lunch. She reached her usual spot. She stood on her tiptoes to get a better view past the reflection of the street on the glass. The piano was just sitting there. The lid was open, as if waiting for someone to sit down and play. The polished wood reflected the room around it. The girl sighed. It was a small, soft sound. She placed her right hand flat against the cool glass. She spread her fingers out, trying to match the size of her hand to the keys she saw on the other side. It was a silent touch. She pressed her palm gently against the pane, as if trying to transfer the music from her mind to the instrument through the glass. "I would play you so gently," she whispered to the glass. Her voice was barely a breath. "I would never hit a wrong note. I would treat you like a friend." She didn't hear the footsteps upstairs. High above the street, on the second floor of the house, a man was standing by his own window. His name was Mr. Sterling. He was a man who had everything he could buy, but he often felt very empty inside. He had been watching the street for days. At first, he had been suspicious. He saw a girl in worn-out clothes lingering on his property. He thought maybe she was planning to run onto the lawn and steal a package, or perhaps damage the garden he paid so much to maintain. He had kept his phone in his hand, ready to call for help. But as he watched, day after day, he realized that she wasn't doing any of those things. She didn't look at the expensive stone statues. She didn't look at the windows where someone might leave a wallet or jewelry. She only looked at the piano. He saw the way she stood. She wasn't tense or ready to run. She was relaxed. She looked at the piano the way some people look at a long-lost love. He saw the way she moved her fingers in the air, practicing chords that weren't there. He saw the sadness in her posture, but also a strange kind of peace. Mr. Sterling knew that piano. It had belonged to his wife. She had been the one who played it. She had filled the house with music and laughter. But when she passed away, the house had fallen silent. He couldn't bring himself to touch the keys. The piano just sat there, gathering dust in the quiet room, like a memory that was too painful to look at directly. Seeing this girl, this stranger from the streets, look at his wife's piano with such longing confused him. Why did she care? Why did a girl who clearly had so little care about a piece of furniture? He leaned closer to his window, watching her. The sun caught the side of her face, highlighting the dried dirt on her cheek and the determination in her eyes. She wasn't just looking, she was listening. He felt a strange feeling in his chest, a pang of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't pity. It was curiosity. Down below, the girl didn't know she was being watched. She was lost in her own world. She pictured herself walking up the stone steps not to steal, but to play. She imagined sitting on the bench, feeling the weight of the keys. She imagined playing a song that would float out the open windows and fill the whole street with beauty. She knew it was a silly dream. Girls like her didn't get to touch pianos like that. They were lucky if they had a roof over their heads and a warm coat. But dreams didn't cost anything, and this was the only dream she had left. She stayed there for 10 minutes, motionless except for her fingers moving against the glass. She didn't take anything. She didn't break anything. She just gave the piano her attention, treating it with more respect than anyone had shown her in a long time. Finally, the light began to fade, and the air grew colder. The girl shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. She knew she had to go. It was a long walk to the shelter, and she needed to get there before the beds filled up. She took one last look at the glossy black instrument through the window. She pressed her forehead against the glass for just a second, closing her eyes to lock the image in her mind. "Good night," she whispered to the empty room. She lowered her hand from the glass. She took a deep breath of the cool evening air and turned away. She adjusted her backpack and started walking back toward the noisy, chaotic part of the city, back to the reality of her life. But her step was a little lighter than it had been before. She had her music, even if it was only in her head. And she had that one moment of silence by the window. She walked down the street, a small figure disappearing into the distance. Behind her, the house stood silent. Upstairs, the man continued to watch her until she was gone from sight. He looked down at his phone, then set it down on the table. He looked back at the piano sitting in the room below. He walked toward the staircase, an idea forming in his mind. The silence in the house suddenly felt a little less heavy. He knew he had to find out who she was. He had to know why that piano mattered to her. The next day was Tuesday, and it felt different right from the start. The air was a bit warmer, but the sky was a hazy gray, making the city look flat and colorless. The girl walked her usual route, keeping her head down. Her backpack felt heavier today, mostly because she hadn't slept well. The shelter was noisy at night, full of coughing and shouting, and it was hard to find peace. But she kept walking, her eyes fixed on the ground, counting her steps to keep her mind occupied. When she turned the corner onto the quiet street with the big houses, she stopped. She noticed something immediately. The black iron gates of the Sterling house were not closed. They were open wide. There was a delivery truck parked outside, its engine rumbling and idling loudly while the driver moved boxes back and forth near the porch. The driver looked busy, wiping sweat from his forehead and talking on his phone, paying no attention to the road. The girl froze. She stood on the sidewalk, her heart beating a little faster. She had never seen the gates open. Usually, the property looked like a picture in a book, something you could look at but never touch. Now, the barrier was gone. She looked around. The street was empty of pedestrians. No one was watching her. She felt a strong pull in her chest. It wasn't about greed. She didn't want to go inside to take things. It was just the curiosity of a moth drawn to a light. She wanted to be closer. She wanted to see if the piano looked different from just a few feet away instead of through the glass from the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the straps of her backpack, and took a step off the curb. Her shoes made a soft crunching sound on the gravel as she walked onto the property. She didn't sneak. She walked slowly, with her head up, staying on the paved path that led to the house. She felt very small walking between the tall bushes and the perfectly trimmed grass. Everything here smelled expensive and clean, like fresh earth and lemons. It was a world away from the smell of exhaust fumes and stale food she was used to. As she got closer to the porch, she could see inside the screen door more clearly. The house looked huge and quiet from here. She stopped at the bottom of the stone steps leading up to the front door. She knew she shouldn't go up the stairs. That felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. She just stood there, looking at the large window. Through the screen, the piano looked even bigger. It was majestic. The light from the window hit the black wood, making it shine like a mirror. The girl could see the reflection of the room in the side of the piano. She stood there, mesmerized. She imagined walking in, sitting down, and placing her hands on those keys. She thought about how the sound would vibrate through the bench and into her bones. It was a nice dream, one that made her forget her growling stomach for a moment. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the porch. The girl jumped, her breath catching in her throat. She almost turned and ran back down the path, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the ground. The screen door opened with a soft squeak, and a man stepped out. It was Mr. Sterling. He was older than she had expected from a distance. His hair was gray, and he wore a simple shirt and trousers, not a suit. He didn't look like a scary monster or a mean guard. He just looked like a man. But he was rich, and to her, that made him powerful. He held a tray in his hands with a tall glass of yellow liquid and a folded piece of white paper. The girl backed up a step, fear rising in her chest. She thought he was going to yell at her. She thought he was going to tell her to get off his property, or maybe even call the police. She braced herself for the shouting. But Mr. Sterling didn't yell. He didn't look angry at all. He looked at her with calm eyes, studying her face. He walked down the steps slowly, holding the tray steady. He didn't speak. He just walked past her, to the side of the porch where there was a small stone pedestal, almost like a table for a bird bath. He set the glass and the paper down on the stone. Then he turned to face her. They were only a few feet apart now. The girl trembled slightly, clutching her backpack strap so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked down at her shoes, afraid to meet his eyes. "It is for you," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was deep and raspy, but it was kind. It wasn't loud or booming. The girl looked up, confused. She pointed a shaking finger at her own chest. "Me?" Mr. Sterling nodded slightly. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He gestured toward the glass of lemonade and the note. "You are here every day," he said simply. "Drink." Then, without saying another word, he turned his back to her. He walked up the steps and back into the house. He left the heavy screen door unlatched, swinging slightly in the breeze. The girl stood alone on the gravel. She didn't know what to do. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She looked at the street. She could run. She could leave right now and go back to the safety of the sidewalk. Nobody would know. But the lemonade looked cold. It had beads of water running down the outside of the glass. And the paper. The paper was a mystery. She stepped closer to the stone pedestal. She was still terrified that someone was going to jump out and grab her. But the driveway was empty. The delivery truck had left while she was watching the porch. She picked up the glass of lemonade. It was icy cold in her hand. She took a small sip. It was sweet and tart, the best thing she had ever tasted. It felt like liquid gold going down her dry throat. She drank it slowly, savoring every drop, feeling the cold sugar wake her up. Then, she looked at the paper. It was thick, creamy paper, not the thin notebook paper she used at school. She picked it up with both hands, being careful not to let the breeze blow it away. She unfolded it. The writing was strong and sharp, made with a fountain pen. It wasn't typed on a computer, it was written by a human hand. She read the words silently, moving her lips as she sounded them out in her head. The instrument sounds better when played from the inside. The front door is unlatched. The girl read it 3 times. She wasn't sure she understood it correctly. It felt too good to be true. Was he telling her to go inside to actually touch the piano? It seemed impossible. Surely, this was a trap. Or a mistake. She looked at the house. The screen door was indeed unlatched, just gently tapping against the frame. She finished the lemonade and set the empty glass back on the stone. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She looked at her clothes. She brushed off the front of her shirt and tried to smooth down her hair. She didn't want to bring dirt into a house like that. Her mind was racing. This was the biggest moment of her life, even though it was just a door and a room. If she walked in there, everything would change. If she turned around and walked away, she would always wonder what if. The fear of doing the wrong thing fought with the hunger in her heart. She looked at the window again. The piano was sitting there, waiting. She took a deep breath. She decided that if this was a mistake, she would leave immediately. But if it was an invitation, she couldn't refuse it. Not even if she was scared. Not even if she was just a poor girl from the shelter. She stepped onto the first stone step. Then the second. Her legs felt shaky, like jelly. She reached the top of the porch. She paused. She looked at the open door. It was dark inside compared to the bright day outside. She couldn't see very far into the hall. She reached out a hand. Her fingers touched the metal mesh of the screen door. She pushed it gently. It swung open silently. She was standing on the threshold. The air inside smelled like lemons and old wood. It smelled safe. She looked down at her shoes. They were dusty. She didn't want to ruin the floor. She bent down and untied her laces. She slipped her shoes off and placed them neatly side by side on the porch mat. She stood in her socks, which had a small hole in the toe, but she wiggled her toes and took the final step. She crossed the threshold. She was inside. The house was quiet, peaceful, and still. She didn't see Mr. Sterling. He had vanished into the depths of the house, leaving her alone with her courage and the promise of the piano. Stepping into the house felt like walking into a different world. The air inside was still and cool, and it smelled like lemons mixed with the old, comforting scent of books. It was quiet, but not the empty kind of quiet outside. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket. The girl stood just inside the entrance for a long moment. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it thumping against her ribs. She felt very small in the large hallway. To her right was a staircase that curved upward, and to her left was the open archway leading to the front parlor. She looked down at her feet. She was standing in her socks, which had a tiny hole near the toe. The floor was made of wood that was so shiny it looked like water. She was worried about leaving marks, so she walked very carefully, placing each foot down gently. She didn't want to ruin anything. This house was perfect, and she felt like she was the one spot of dirt in it. As she walked toward the archway, the room opened up. And there it was. The piano. Up close, it was bigger than she had imagined. It was a grand piano, black and glossy, sitting in the middle of the room like a sleeping animal. The wood reflected the light coming from the large window, making it shine. It sat on a rectangular rug that looked thick and soft. The girl stopped a few feet away from it. She didn't dare touch it yet. She just wanted to look. It was beautiful. The legs were carved in curves that looked strong and elegant. The keys were white and black, waiting for fingers. Above the keys was a small shelf where the music would sit, but it was empty. The lid was propped open, revealing the strings inside, which looked like copper and gold spider webs. She stood there, taking deep breaths. She had never been this close to an instrument like this. She felt a mix of excitement and terror. She was afraid that if she touched it, she might break it, or that it would sound terrible, or that Mr. Sterling would come back and shout at her. But the pull was too strong. She walked the last few steps until she was right in front of the bench. The bench was covered in black velvet. It looked soft, but she hesitated to sit on it in case her dirty clothes stained the fabric. She looked at her skirt. It was old and faded, the hem coming loose a bit. She brushed it off with her hands, trying to smooth out the wrinkles and wipe away any dust from the street. She wanted to be as presentable as possible. Finally, she sat down. The bench was firm but comfortable. She was surprised by how stable it felt. She sat on the edge, her back straight, just like she imagined a real pianist would sit. Her feet dangled slightly because she was short, not quite reaching the pedals on the floor. She rested her feet on the gold pedals anyway, just touching them lightly. She held her hands up. They were small, with short nails that were scrubbed clean earlier that morning. Her palms were a little sweaty because she was so nervous. She looked at the white keys. They looked like rows of teeth, perfect and even. She hovered her hands over the keys. She didn't press down yet. She just imagined the weight of them. She closed her eyes for a second and listened to the silence of the room. In her head, she could hear the song she wanted to play. It was a simple melody, slow and sad. It wasn't a famous song by a famous composer. It was a tune she remembered from a long time ago, a lullaby that someone used to hum to her when she was very little and life was happier. She didn't remember the face of the person who hummed it, but she remembered the feeling of being safe. Opening her eyes, she took a deep breath. She decided to play just one note. Just to see what it sounded like. She lifted her right hand and extended her index finger. She chose a white key near the middle. With a gentle tap, she pressed it down. Clang. The sound was clear and bright, ringing through the room like a bell. It was so much louder than she expected. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls and fill the air. It wasn't a tiny beep like a toy keyboard, it was a rich, full voice. The girl gasped and pulled her hand back quickly, as if the piano had bitten her. She looked around, terrified that the noise had broken something. But the house remained still. The note faded away slowly, lingering in the air like a ghost. The girl exhaled, a small smile forming on her lips. It was a beautiful sound. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever created. She grew a little braver. She placed her hand back on the keys. This time, she used her thumb to press a lower note. Thrum. It vibrated through the bench and up her legs. She felt the music in her body, not just in her ears. She began to play. She didn't know the names of the chords or the proper theory. She only knew what sounded right to her. She started with the low notes, playing them slowly, letting them ring out. Then, she added some higher notes with her right hand. She played hesitantly at first, fearing a wrong note. But as the melody started to form, she forgot to be afraid. Her fingers moved with a mind of their own. They found the pattern of the lullaby. It was a song about saying goodbye and holding on, about feeling sad but hoping for better days. The girl poured all her feelings into the keys. She thought about the cold nights in the shelter, the hunger in her belly, and the loneliness of walking the streets alone. She let all that sadness flow out of her fingers and into the piano. The music wasn't perfect. Her timing was a bit shaky, and her fingers stumbled over a tricky part once or twice. But it was honest. There was a raw emotion to it that no amount of practice could fake. The room seemed to come alive with the sound. The notes hung in the air, swirling around the dust motes dancing in the beam of light from the window. She closed her eyes again, letting her hands do the work. She didn't see the empty room or the expensive furniture. She only saw colors in her mind. The low notes were deep blue, and the high notes were soft yellow. She felt a tear run down her cheek, hot and fast, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't care about crying here. The piano understood. The piano didn't judge her for being poor or for having holes in her socks. It just sang for her. She played on and on, moving through the verses of the song she remembered. She got lost in the music. For the first time in years, she wasn't worrying about where her next meal was coming from or where she was going to sleep. She was just a musician, and she was playing. She felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a very long time. The heaviness in her chest lifted, replaced by the lightness of the melody. The song built up, getting a little louder, a little faster. Her hands moved more confidently now, pressing the keys with more force. She was fully absorbed. The world outside didn't exist. The rich man who owned the house didn't exist. There was only her and the music. She felt a connection to the piano, as if it had been waiting for her all this time, just like she had been waiting for it. It felt like coming home after a long, hard journey. She didn't notice the soft sound of footsteps on the carpet in the hallway behind her. She didn't see the shadow that fell across the floor. She was too far gone in the music, caught up in the beauty of the sound she was creating. She played the last few notes of the song, letting them fade into silence, her hands resting gently on the keys as the vibrations stopped. She sat there, breathing hard, her eyes still closed, listening to the quiet return to the room. The silence that filled the room after the last note faded away was heavy, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something important has been said, when people are just letting the words sink in. The girl sat with her hands resting lightly on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was breathing deeply, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the song she had just played. She felt like she had poured a bucket of water out of her soul, emptying herself of all the worry and sadness she had been carrying. She thought she was alone. She thought the kind man who had let her in was somewhere far away, perhaps in a kitchen or an office, giving her this moment of privacy. She was so lost in the feeling of the music that she didn't hear the soft footsteps on the thick carpet behind her. She didn't hear the gentle creak of a floorboard. She only realized she wasn't alone when she felt a presence beside her. The air shifted, and a shadow fell across her hands. Her eyes snapped open, and she gasped loudly, pulling her hands away from the piano as if she had touched a hot stove. She scooted back on the bench, her heart hammering against her ribs again. She was terrified. She thought she had done something wrong. She thought maybe she had played too loudly or touched something she shouldn't have, but when she looked up, she saw Mr. Sterling. He was standing right next to the bench. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was about to call the police. He was just standing there, watching her with a look of intense curiosity and something else, something soft and sad. The girl froze, her mouth opened slightly, ready to apologize, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But before she could make a sound, Mr. Sterling moved. He didn't speak. He simply sat down on the bench next to her. There was enough room for two. The bench was wide and long. The girl pressed herself against the arm of the piano to make space for him, trying to shrink away so she wouldn't be in his way. She held her breath. She had never been this close to a rich person before. She could smell the fabric of his clothes, clean and starched, and a faint scent of peppermint. Mr. Sterling didn't look at her face. He looked at the keys. He reached out his large, weathered hands. They were the hands of an older man, with prominent veins and a few sunspots, but they were strong. He placed them gently on the ivory keys. The girl watched, mesmerized. He didn't slam his hands down. He didn't try to show off. He just pressed a few notes. They were low notes, deep and resonant. The sound seemed to come from the floor itself. He played a slow, simple rhythm. It was a heartbeat sound. Boom, boom, boom. He held a chord down, letting the sound ring out. Then, he turned his head slightly and looked at the girl. He didn't smile, but he nodded his head once, just a small movement. It was a signal. It was an invitation. The girl understood. He wanted her to play. She hesitated. Her hands were shaking. She felt like she was dreaming. Sitting next to a stranger, a rich man, on a piano bench, it was impossible. But the music was there, hanging in the air between them. She couldn't say no to the music. She slowly moved her hands back to the keys. She placed them over the high notes, the treble side. Mr. Sterling's hands were on the low notes, the bass side. They were like two different pieces of a puzzle, fitting together. She took a breath and pressed a key. It was a high, clear note that floated above the deep, heavy notes Mr. Sterling was playing. It sounded beautiful. It sounded like a bird flying over a mountain. She played another note, and then another. She started to pick out the melody again, the sad lullaby. Mr. Sterling listened. He adjusted his playing to match her speed. When she slowed down, he slowed down. When she sped up, he followed her. He wasn't playing the lead, he was supporting her. He was giving her a foundation to stand on. He filled in the empty spaces between her notes with rich, warm harmonies. The girl forgot her fear. She forgot that he was a stranger. She forgot that she was poor and he was rich. Right now, they were just two people making a song together. She closed her eyes again, letting her fingers move. She felt the vibrations of his notes through the bench blending with the vibrations of hers. It felt like they were having a conversation without speaking a single word. She was telling him about her day, about the hunger, about the cold. He was answering her with notes that said, "I hear you. It's okay. You are safe here." The music grew. It swelled up like a wave in the ocean. The girl played with more confidence now, hitting the keys with a little more force because she knew he was there to catch her. She played a run of fast notes, her fingers dancing over the ivory. Mr. Sterling played a deep, rolling rhythm underneath her, pushing her forward, encouraging her. Tears began to stream down the girl's face again, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. She didn't care. She was making something beautiful with someone else. She wasn't alone in her head anymore. The music was connecting them in a way that nothing else could. They played for a long time. No one knows how long it actually was. Time seems to stop when music is in the air. They played until the girl's fingers were tired and Mr. Sterling's shoulders relaxed. They played the lullaby over and over, changing it a little bit each time, making it new. Finally, the girl slowed down. She played the last few notes of the song, soft and gentle, like a whisper. Mr. Sterling played a final, deep chord that rumbled through the floorboards. He held it, letting the sound fade away slowly into the quiet house. Then, he lifted his hands off the keys. The girl did the same. The silence came back, but it was different now. It was a companionable silence. It was the silence of two people who have shared a secret. The girl sat there, her hands in her lap, looking at the keys. She was afraid to look at him. She didn't know what would happen next. Would he tell her to leave now? Was the game over? She felt a shift in the bench as Mr. Sterling turned toward her. She could feel his gaze on the side of her face. Slowly, she turned her head. He was looking at her with water in his eyes. He wasn't crying, but his eyes were shiny and bright. He looked at her not like she was a dirty girl from the street, but like she was a human being who had just given him a precious gift. "You play with your heart," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was low and raspy, quieter than it had been before. "Not many people do that." The girl didn't know what to say. She just nodded, unable to speak. He looked away for a moment, up at the ceiling, as if he was looking for someone who wasn't there. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He looked back at the girl. "This piano," he said, tapping the wood gently. "It has been very quiet for a long time." "Too quiet?" "I used to play with someone. A long time ago." He paused, and his voice cracked just a little bit. "Since she left, I haven't been able to touch it. It hurt too much." The silence was too loud. He looked at the girl's small, worn hands resting in her lap. "But today, you broke the silence. You reminded me what it sounds like." The girl looked at him, really looking at him, for the first time. She saw the lines in his face, the gray hair, the sadness in his eyes. She realized that he was lonely too. Just like her. He had a big house and nice things, but he was all alone in it. "I didn't mean to mess it up," she whispered softly. Mr. Sterling shook his head. "You didn't mess it up," he said firmly. "You fixed it." He stood up slowly from the bench. His knees popped a little bit. He buttoned his jacket and looked down at her. The girl thought that was it. She thought he was going to show her the door now. But instead, he held out his hand. It was a large hand, calloused and warm. "Come with me," he said. The girl looked at his hand, then up at his face. She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, drying the tears. She took a deep breath, reached out her small hand, and placed it in his. It felt warm and safe. He didn't squeeze too hard, just enough to let her know he was there. He helped her off the bench. She stood on the carpet, feeling a little dizzy from the music and the emotion. She wasn't just a poor girl from the shelter anymore. She was a musician. And she had just made a friend. The girl stood there, her small hand resting in Mr. Sterling's large, warm grip. She expected him to lead her to the front door. She thought he would say, "Thank you for the music, now go home." That is how the world usually worked. Nice moments ended, and you went back to real life. But Mr. Sterling didn't turn toward the exit. He turned toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. He didn't pull her along roughly. He walked slowly, guiding her gently past the grand staircase and down a corridor lined with paintings. The girl looked around in wonder. The house seemed to go on forever. She smelled old paper and wood polish, a smell that made her think of libraries and quiet afternoons. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. Mr. Sterling pushed it open. The room inside was different from the rest of the house. It wasn't fancy like the parlor. It was messy but cozy. There were books stacked in towers on the floor. A large desk sat by the window, covered in papers. In the corner, there was a comfortable-looking leather chair and a small table with a tea set. Sunlight poured in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like a room where someone actually lived, not just a showroom for guests. "Sit," Mr. Sterling said, pointing to a soft chair near the desk. The girl hesitated. She looked at her clothes. She was still worried about getting dirt on his things. "It is okay," he said gently, reading her mind. "The chair is strong." She sat down carefully. It was the softest thing she had ever felt in her life. She sank into the leather, and for a moment, she felt like she might disappear into it. It was warm and comforting. Mr. Sterling walked over to his desk. He didn't sit in his big boss chair. Instead, he opened a drawer and rummaged around for a moment. The girl sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating a nervous rhythm. She watched his back. He seemed like a man who was carrying a heavy weight, but he stood a little straighter now than he had when she first saw him. He turned around. In his hand, he held a small silver key. It wasn't a key for the front door. It was smaller, with a fancy bow on top. He walked over to her and stopped. He looked down at her with eyes that were serious but kind. "This piano," he began, his voice raspy and low. "It belonged to my wife. Her name was Eleanor." He paused, saying the name as if tasting it. "She was a teacher. She believed that music was inside everyone, just waiting to get out. She used to teach students in this very house. The house was always full of noise and laughter and mistakes and music." He looked out the window for a moment, a sad smile on his face. "When she got sick, the music stopped. When she died, the house became quiet. I closed the doors. I locked the piano. I couldn't bear to hear it without her. It felt like the piano was dead, just a piece of furniture taking up space." He looked back at the girl. "But you. You stood outside. You looked at it with respect. You didn't see a dead thing. You saw a friend. And today, when you played, you gave it a voice again." The girl didn't know what to say. She just looked up at him, listening. "I have been watching you from the window," he admitted. "I saw how you walked. I saw how you looked at the flowers but never picked them. I saw how you treated the house with care even from the sidewalk. You have a gift, young lady. You have something that cannot be bought with all the money I have." He held out the silver key. "This key," he said, "is to the side door of the house. The one near the garden. It opens directly into the music room where the piano is." The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the key, then up at him. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mr. Sterling continued, "I have an empty studio room in the back. It has a heater. It has a small fridge. It is quiet. I want you to come here every day after school. I don't want you walking the streets. I don't want you worrying about where to go." He leaned down a little closer, looking her right in the eyes. "I want you to practice. You will play for me, and you will play for her. You will learn how to read the music properly. And in exchange, you will help me remember what it sounds like to be alive." Tears spilled over the girl's eyelids and ran down her cheeks. She didn't try to stop them this time. She felt a lump in her throat so big she could barely swallow. This wasn't just charity. He wasn't just giving her money or food. He was giving her a home. He was giving her a purpose. "But sir," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I don't have anything to give you. I am just a girl from the shelter." "You are not just a girl," Mr. Sterling said firmly. "You are the one who brought the music back. That is everything." He placed the key in her hand. It was cold and heavy. She closed her fingers around it tight, holding onto it like it was a diamond. "Now," he said, Straightening up. There is one condition. The girl looked up, nervous again. You must practice every day, he said, and finally, a small smile cracked his serious face. Eleanor would be very upset if I let a talent like yours go to waste because of laziness. The girl nodded vigorously. I will, she promised. I will practice every single day. I promise. Good, he said. Then it is settled. He didn't make a big show of it. He didn't call the newspapers or take a picture. He just walked over to a small closet and pulled out a box of tissues. He handed it to her. She took one and wiped her face, blowing her nose loudly. For the first time in a long time, she laughed a little. It was a tiny sound, but it was real. Mr. Sterling laughed too, a short, rusty sound. Come, he said. Let us go back to the piano. You have a lot to learn, and we have wasted enough time talking. They walked back down the hallway together. This time, the girl didn't feel small. She didn't feel like an intruder. She walked with her head up, holding the key tight in her pocket. She felt like she belonged. They sat back down at the bench. Mr. Sterling pulled a thick book of music from the shelf above the piano. He placed it on the stand. It was filled with black notes and lines, strange symbols that the girl didn't understand yet. This is Mozart, he said. He is a bit old-fashioned, but he knows what he is doing. He pointed to the page. This is a note called C. This is G. This is how we find them on the piano. For the next hour, the rich man and the poor girl sat side by side. He taught her the names of the notes. He taught her how to hold her wrists. He corrected her gently when she made a mistake, and he praised her when she got it right. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the garden. The city traffic rumbled in the distance, a world away. Inside the house, the silence was gone. The piano was singing again. It was clumsy at first, filled with starts and stops, but it was beautiful. And as the girl played her first proper scale, Mr. Sterling closed his eyes and smiled. He wasn't alone anymore. And neither was she. The music had connected them, filling the empty spaces in both their hearts with something that money could never buy. It was a new beginning, written in the language of melody, played out on black and white keys.